Letter from a dead relative, a mystical fantastical world. It all seems so generic, but when it comes to folklore, it is anything but. Set in the desolate town of Doolin, we follow the story of two unlikely heroes, Ellen and Keats, as they attempt to uncover the secrets of the village in which the living can allegedly meet the dead. At times, Folklore is your standard RPG, maintaining an easy-to-use combat system and the ability to freely move around, more or less. However, the story is so eerie and mind-bending that it would definitely be a shame to miss out on it. Despite being set in the underpopulated Doolin, Ellen and Keats rarely spend any time within the village itself, instead gaining the ability to enter the netherworld and the knowledge of those who have died. Nevertheless, Doolin is a beautifully constructed village with little of everything. The story is such that you will have to explore it in its entirety, but its size allows for this not to feel like a chore. In fact, maintaining such a small village aids in familiarising ourselves with the surroundings to the point where you can easily point out individual houses, the pub, the beach, the cliff. They all become ingrained in your memories as you traverse what can only be really considered the hub for the game. Folklore is broken up into chapters, much like a book, between which the players have the choice of which of the two protagonists they would like to follow. However, as both characters follow the same storyline and share many interactions together, entering the same netherworlds and fighting the same enemies in the same order, the game can feel somewhat repetitive to its fault. In fact, following one side of the story to its completion will only result in the choice of character being reduced. The player is forced, in order to complete the game, to play both sides. This backtracking is tedious and somewhat dull, as neither the netherworlds nor the final bosses differ in any way. In other words, simply memorising the correct paths through the world will fly the player from chapter to chapter with relative ease. To its credit though, Folklore attempts to salvage this by changing some of the folks each character encounters within the world. However, without the surprise of the storyline and the twists and turns, the game does feel a little bland. Folklore's combat system is simplistic yet very diverse. Neither Keats nor Ellen can fight on their own, and instead gain the ability to summon defeated enemies to fight for them. Consider it a Pokemon-like system. As you traverse through the game, gradually a small army of folks are captured, and so the movesets of the characters is greatly increased. This makes it feel as if the characters are growing. However, the player is limited to the 4 buttons on the controller to place attacks. If you're like me and always want to keep a shield on, this number is reduced to 3. As many enemies are impervious to certain moves, we often need to switch up our moveset. This is done by hitting the L2 button to bring up a clunky menu in which we navigate to our desired folk. Repeatedly opening up this menu becomes tiresome and chore-like over time, as it unavoidably breaks up the action. Despite this, the battle system is able to maintain satisfaction for the player. It is not so easy that we can waltz through the entire game without knowing much at all, but not so hard that we need to think overly before each encounter. The differing and unique monsters in each realm definitely helps in this. The creatures of each realm greatly differ most of the time, and the diversity between Ellen's and Keats's captures is nice to see. However, as expected, the game does, irritatingly, use the same models in some world, with a slightly different tint or colour. This is upsetting without a doubt. Folks can be made stronger once captured by fulfilling certain criteria, but doing so again feels like a chore and is unnecessary from completion of the campaign, making the system feel somewhat worthless. In my time playing through the game, I rarely, if at all, touched this system. Folklore's biggest strengths are the environments in the netherworlds, ranging from beautiful, magical woodland to deep, dark water worlds. No two locations can be considered the same, or even really similar. In fact, the environments are so dynamic and so vast that it is easy to miss a lot. Simply stopping and looking around each map gives hints towards both the storyline and the incredible lore for the game. It is a masterpiece of concept and design. So how to conclude and evaluate Folklore? Well, despite the fact that the graphics aren't the very cutting edge, the wonderful world design and environment means that this fact is barely observed, something very refreshing indeed. The soundtrack is great and somewhat dark, and is able to capture the feelings of the characters very well. The gameplay is solid despite it having a somewhat flawed combat system. Its complexity and variety make it very interesting and a dynamic experience. The story is one of the best around on the PS3 and doesn't fall into the trap of spelling out every little detail to the player, through the main quest at least, forcing those who want to know more to play through the side quests. However, flaws in forcing the player to replay levels which are unchanged and unmoved is Folklore's biggest flaw and disappointment. I therefore will give it a 7.5 out of 10.